Thank you to Modern Day Debates for hosting, and thank you to everyone watching. The debate today is about Sharia versus human rights. Sharia just means Islamic law. Islamic law is not just corporal punishment, it's a holistic system of life that governs everything from how Muslims pray and worship, how they get married, to criminal punishments and even economic matters. My main point today is simple. Harris Sultan and other ex-Muslims are playing a con game. They're being dishonest with their audience and sometimes outright lying to them. Today I'm going to focus on 3 of their biggest lies. Lie number 1. Promoters of human rights like Harris claim human rights are a beacon of hope. Human rights are the mark of civilization and progress, and everyone should adopt human rights. But is this true? Do human rights bring prosperity and progress? 192 out of 195 countries of the world have officially adopted the UN's Universal Declaration of Human Rights. That's 98% of all countries in the world. Do we see prosperity and progress in these countries? Let's look at the GDP per capita. North America is at $61,000 per capita. Western Europe is at $54,000 per capita. Australia and New Zealand are at about $55,000. These regions are at the top of the heap. It must be because they're so strong in terms of human rights and democracy, right? But let's compare that to Eastern Europe. Just $9,000 GDP per capita. Latin America is less than $7,400 per capita. India, the world's largest democracy, is only at $2,000. Sub-Saharan Africa is at $1,500. For Muslim countries, the average GDP per capita is $7,500. And if you exclude the oil-rich countries, the number is at $4,600. So when people want to say Muslim countries are economically behind because of lack of human rights, the reality is Muslim countries are at the same level as most of these human rights respecting countries. Why do countries like America, UK, Britain, Australia have 10 times, 20 times, 30 times the GDP per capita of countries in Latin America, Eastern Europe, Sub-Saharan Africa? Why this massive inequality? None of the countries in these regions are Muslim, and all of them respect and abide by human rights. Consider Botswana. Considered one of the oldest democracies in the Southern Hemisphere, one of the earliest adopters of LGBT rights in Africa, very high female involvement with voting and politics, but it has only 1/10 the GDP per capita of the US. Or consider Haiti. They ratified their secular constitution in 1805, over 200 years ago. They had a female president in 1990. Their GDP per capita is 1/50th the United States. And on and on. On this other side of the coin, you have countries that have openly rejected human rights and democracy, like China, which has a GDP of $10,000, and Singapore, which has a GDP per capita of $65,000. So either way you look at it, there is no correlation between adoption of human rights and democracy with economic prosperity. Harris, you need to explain this. These countries that have nothing to do with Islam, that have adopted human rights and democracy and women's rights and LGBT rights, why are they stuck in abject poverty? Because you want to blame problems of poverty, problems of violence and social dysfunction on Islam. So how do you explain these countries that have nothing to do with Islam, that have these same problems and often worse problems? Why is it that human rights only brings prosperity for North America and Western Europe, and the majority of the rest of the world suffers? Better yet, explain why people living in human rights abiding democracies in Latin America, in Africa, are literally dying to migrate to America and Western Europe. Why are they risking their lives to escape their human rights hellholes, Harris? Explain that. And we don't have to just limit ourselves to GDP. Look at the life expectancy. Latin America, Eastern Europe, Sub-Saharan Africans have 5 to 15 years lower life expectancy. Those countries also reported far lower happiness levels. According to the UN's 2017 World Happiness Report, according to self-reported happiness, countries of North America and Western Europe have the highest levels of happiness, while Latin America, Sub-Saharan Africa, and Eastern Europe have the lowest levels. So why is this, Harris? None of these countries are Muslim countries. They're all democratic countries, secular countries. Some of them even have very high levels of atheism. So why aren't they enjoying progress and prosperity? Let's call this question the Botswana question. If Harris cannot explain these discrepancies, if he cannot answer this Botswana question, then he should admit that democracy and human rights are just a big hoax. Harris wants people to hate Islam by trying to pin the issue of poverty and social dysfunction to Muslim countries, but as we've seen, it's not a strong connection. Lie number 2, Harris wants to pretend like his problem is with Islam, but in reality, his criticisms of Islam apply to every single religion and every traditional form of culture, because all traditional religions and cultures clash with modern human rights. Traditional Christianity, traditional Judaism, Native American culture, Hindu culture, Shinto religion, all of these traditional ways of life clash with modern human rights. This is because human rights is an extremist ideology. Human rights ideology says that the most important thing is individual liberty and equality. Individual liberty and equality have to be prioritized over literally every other human value. This is extremism. Every other traditional religion and life philosophy says, no, individual liberty and equality have limits. Islamic law, for example, agrees with the human rights activists that, like Harris, that individual liberty and equality are beautiful values. For example, in Islam, you have the right to your wealth, to your property, the right to privacy, and so forth. Also, Islam provides legal equality between all people, men and women, Muslims and non-Muslims, in certain, but not all, areas of the law. But Islam says, yes, individual liberty and equality are beautiful values, but they're just 2 out of many beautiful values. And sometimes you have to restrict liberty and equality in order to preserve other important values and institutions. A useful analogy here is imagine offering a child candy or broccoli. If it were up to the child, he would choose the candy every time. Eventually, the child would get diabetes and die. That's what human rights liberalism is like. It's just about giving the candy of individual liberty and saying that's all that matters. Islam says, look, there's nothing wrong with candy. In fact, we love candy. But if you only eat candy, you will die. You also need meat, dairy, vegetables, and carbs. As a simple example, in Islam, you can't have sex with whomever you want, whenever you want. There are strict restrictions on premarital and extramarital relations, and the obvious benefit of this is that it ensures strong and stable marriages. This is because of human biology and natural human psychology. Islamic law perfectly accounts for human nature, and abiding by the Sharia has these clear benefits for marriage. But human rights says, no. People should have 100% individual liberty and 100% sexual autonomy. You should have the right to sleep with whomever you want, whenever you want, unimpeded. That may sound good to those who have been indoctrinated by this extremist ideology, but we have to ask, what are the consequences of such a policy? Is a society that adopts unfettered sexual autonomy compatible with marriage, with love, with romance? Is it compatible with family? Well, we don't have to speculate. We can look at countries where this so-called human right has spread, and the statistics paint a very bleak, dark picture. And I'll discuss the exact statistics later in the debate, inshallah. Another example is family relations, because just family relations beyond just husband and wife. Science and anthropology say that humans have this deeply rooted biological drive to come together in families. And these families have a natural hierarchy with fathers as the heads of the household, then mothers, then children, and so forth. Again, this human behavior is biologically rooted, and historians and anthropologists point out that the same patriarchal family structure is found in 99% of human societies historically, including Islamic societies. But human rights extremism says, no, this kind of patriarchy with men over women violates the principle of equality. Men and women should all have the same authority, the same roles, and everything has to be exactly equal. This is not only an attack on Islamic law, this is an attack on human biology itself. This is an attack on 99% of world cultures which do have patriarchal family structures. And the result of this human rights extremism that has been forced onto the whole world for the past 200 years is that families are being destroyed. Again, I will share, inshallah, more information to justify all these points. But the main point is that marriage, family, community, and even the human race itself, these are things that have a deep-rooted biological basis. Islamic law preserves and protects these things by setting the proper balance with individual liberties and equality and other important values. Modern human rights, in contrast, destroys marriage, destroys family, destroys community and all traditional cultures and the human race overall, because it puts individual liberty and equality above all else. The question is, does Harris believe in balance, or is he the extremist? Let's call this the balance question. Ultimately, Harris would be lying if he said that his problem is solely with Islam. He should be honest. The problems he has with Islam violating human rights, he has with all traditional cultures and religions that limit individual liberty for the sake of protecting marriage, family, and community. Harris should be honest. Instead of saying human rights versus Sharia, he should say human rights versus literally every traditional culture and religion in the world. Lie number 3. What is the difference between Harris Sultan and European colonizers? What is the difference between Harris Sultan and the neocons in Washington who pushed for the murderous invasion of Iraq and Afghanistan 20 years ago and continue to agitate for human rights in the Muslim world today? What is the difference? Let's call this the colonial question. Because all the arguments Harris brings against Muslims in Afghanistan or Pakistan or anywhere else, all of those exact same arguments have been used by European colonizers historically against not only Muslims, but against Native Americans, against Africans, against Aboriginals, against the Chinese. When Harris says Muslims abuse women because they practice polygamy, that exact same argument was used by American settlers in the 18th and 19th century to dehumanize Native Americans and justify genociding them. When Harris says Muslims are barbaric because they use corporal punishments against criminals, that exact same argument was used by the European colonial empire against the African tribes they genocided. The real question is, does Harris think the colonial project was a good thing? After all, colonialism is what brought modern human rights to all these different parts of the world. The West invading and occupying the world to bring freedom and democracy isn't something that just happened in Iraq and Afghanistan. It's something that's been happening for over 200 years. If Harris thinks human rights are so amazing, then does he think it was a good thing that Africa was colonized? Or Latin America? Does he think it was a good thing that India was colonized? Wasn't it colonialism that brought his own Muslim ancestors in the subcontinent to the light of reason and human rights? So Harris, my question is simple. Clearly the world is not going to freely choose human rights. History has definitively proven that, and Afghanistan is only the most recent example. If you really want people to abandon their religions, abandon their ways of life, their cultural heritage, and replace them with human rights, you have to force them. And forcing people inevitably gets very brutal and very bloody. That's the only way. That's why the 19th, 20th, and 21st centuries are soaked with the blood of non-Europeans who were killed in the name of spreading freedom and democracy. So are you going to be honest, Harris, and stand by colonialism? Look, if human rights are so wonderful as you claim, Harris, then 200 years of brutal colonialism and millions of dead must have been worth it. Why don't you own it, Harris? When you advocate human rights, you're like a chef that presents this appetizing sausage to your audience, but you aren't honest about how that sausage is made. Muslims, at least, are honest. Islam is honest that spreading Islam sometimes requires war. That's acknowledged in the Quran and the example of the Prophet, peace be upon him. And I'm not equating Muslim conquest with European colonialism, by the way, because there are major differences that we can talk about. For one, Euro-American colonialism, past and present, is genocidal, and the death counts make that very clear. But my point is, you human rights activists are not honest. You don't own up to the true horrifying nature of spreading freedom and democracy. So Harris, if human rights are so brilliant and fantastic, then be consistent. Tell us that the millions of deaths and the brutal occupations are worth it. You can't make an omelet without breaking a few eggs, right? So just own it. Stop pretending you're something you're not. You're just playing a con game. The only way you can credibly sell human rights to your audience is if you hide all these things or gloss over them. You hide the brutal history of human rights. You hide the fact that human rights destroys marriage, family, community, how it attacks every traditional way of life. You have to hide all these things because otherwise no one would buy it. And actually it would make Islam look pretty good because Islam is fighting against this human rights monster. But you can't be honest, can you, Harris? So just stop with this con game.
Okay.
We will